July 1988 saw AKIRA hit theatres in Japan, produced on a budget of $10 million. It was the most expensive animated movie to date in that country. Many corporations such as Toho, Bandai and even Pioneer's Laserdisc division funded it, who were labelled the AKIRA Committee. It was successful at the time, but it really made its mark when it came to VHS. In 1989 it received limited distribution in the USA by Streamline Pictures, who also produced an English dub for international markets. Apparently Streamline said that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg felt the movie was unmarketable in the US. I think many people thought an animated movie aimed at adults and to be marketed to the general public may not fly. It didn't do very well in the States, barely making over $500,000, so probably down to theatres not being too keen on the idea led to its limited distribution. Like the US, the UK got limited screenings in early 1991, but I think many of the investors involved in AKIRA knew it would do very well on home video, and it certainly did. During a time when cinema tickets were the quarter of the price of a VHS tape, it made a healthy profit. Katsuhiro Osamu, the writer and supervising director of AKIRA, had first published his AKIRA comics in late 1982, and the series ran till 1990. He had no real intention to turn it into a movie, but interest had been shown in his work and he was approached to translate it to the silver screen. He had already had an interest in animation, and it didn't take much convincing for him to pursue that idea. When the film was in production and when it got released, the comic series still wasn't finished, so they had to create a new ending, or one that would essentially hint at what would happen later in the comics. The finished comic series runs at over 2,000 pages, spanning 6 volumes, so cramming the majority of that into a 2-hour movie is extremely challenging and difficult. It's a key problem with many movies based on large novels or long-running series. The movie tries to cover the key areas of the book, but a lot of character development is left out. The issue of drug addiction is barely covered in the film, but is an important part of the comics. In the film you see Tatsuro asking for capsules, which is a street drug or the same drug used on the childlike individuals to help boost their abilities, but the street drug is considerably weaker. Volume 6 of the graphic series concentrates on the whole battle at the end, and in the movie it's condensed to about 10 minutes. So you can see the challenges they faced adapting this series. AKIRA was one of the first animated features to have its dialogue and music produced first before any sales of animation were photographed. This was common practice in other forms of animation outside of Japan, but this was new territory for them. The animators closely watched the voice actors when it came to matching the dialogue to the visuals. The actors only had a visual guide or storyboards to give them inspiration when it came time to performing. Many of the actors felt like they were taking part in a radio drama, which made the voiceover process very exciting to record and rewarding. The film incorporated more than 160,000 animation cells, so every shot is packed with detail. You can blink an eye and miss an amazing piece of artwork, which is just lingering in the background. It's a movie on repeated viewing you find more and more subtle details with its beautiful visuals. The majority of the film takes place at night, which was uncommon for a cartoon at the time, making it very challenging to photograph the elements. In the original behind the scenes video for the movie, it states that it was shot on 70mm film, but I believe it was only blown up to 70mm from 35 for presentations. But from viewing the more recent Blu-rays, I'd be hard pressed not to believe it's on 70mm down to its rich detail and clarity. With all animated movies, it's generally best to stick with the original audio mix. That's what it was originally designed around and the director's original vision. With AKIRA, I watched the original Streamline audio dub when it came out in the UK and saw it a couple of more times, but the one I'm most familiar with is the remaster from 2001. It's funny, the old English dub for Kaneda was voiced by the guy who did Leonardo's voice on the Ninja Turtles cartoon.
That's enough, Tetsuo. Are you trying to kill him?
You got it! I'm gonna wipe this guy all over the street!
Get a hold of yourself!
In 2001, Pioneer funded a new voice dub and remastered the picture and sound. They spent $1 million making these improvements. I think it was remastered again for Blu-ray. I saw the re-release of AKIRA last year in its original Japanese audio, which to be honest I wasn't that familiar with because I'd always stuck with the 2001 English dub. From watching the original audio, I found the 2001 version to be a very good translation, but it is really down to personal preference. I have no problem watching movies with subtitles, but with AKIRA and its complicated story, it can help to have it in English, especially for newcomers, but by no means am I saying it's better than the Japanese audio. The movie opens in 1988 and Tokyo is destroyed by an explosion resulting in World War III. 31 years later, the new city of New Tokyo is built on a landfill in Tokyo Bay. In a bar, Kaneda, the leader of a bike gang called the Capsules, is by a jukebox. His friend bursts into the bar and warns him that they have their rival gang, known as the Clowns, cornered. Kaneda and his best friend Tetsuo head out to take on the gang and get into a battle along the motorway. Tetsuo takes out one of the clown gang members, but fails to see the childlike individual called Takashi standing in the middle of the road. He practically crashes his bike into him, causing this huge explosion. Takashi is remarkably unharmed. Kaneda and the rest of the gang show up, and so does the military, who take Takashi and Tetsuo away. Tetsuo is placed in hospital. Kaneda and his gang are interrogated by the police on the events that night. Kaneda encounters Kei as he cheekily browses the police records and instantly gets the hots for her. Kei is a member of the revolutionary group who had originally broken out Takashi out of his security prison, but the member of the team responsible for this is gunned down in the streets by the authorities. Kaneda arranges for her release along with his fellow gang members. Kei thanks Kaneda for getting her out of questioning by the police, but she doesn't fall for his advances and shoots off. Meanwhile, the Colonel and Doctor discover that Tetsuo possesses psychic capabilities similar to Akira. Akira is the young child who caused Tokyo's destruction and the eventual start of World War III. Akira's body was tested on to learn his new abilities, but the scientists at the time were unable to tap into his powers, and his scattered body parts were stored underground in a secured bunker. Kyoko, another individual with psychic abilities, has visions of Neo-Tokyo's destruction, and the Colonel tells the scientist to kill Tetsuo if he thinks the power may get out of control. Tetsuo wakes up in hospital and quickly escapes, and flees and heads to meet up with his girlfriend at her apartment. They steal Kaneda's motorcycle, which doesn't go unnoticed. Tetsuo and Kaori are confronted by the clowns. Kaneda and the Capsules come to the rescue. Tetsuo gets frustrated and angry that Kaneda came to his assistance, claiming he can look after himself. He begins to suffer a psychotic migraine and starts tripping out, seeing crazy visions like the ground crumbling beneath him and his guts falling out. The military has been keeping a close eye on him, and they grab Tetsuo by surprise and take him back to the hospital for further analysis. A terrorist team attacks the city, and Kaneda spots Kei fleeing the scene with her rebel colleagues. The police chase down Kei, but Kaneda comes to her rescue in a rather clumsy fashion. He joins Kei at a rendezvous point, but Ryu, her close friend, doesn't trust him and locks him away. Kaneda is caught listening to Ryu's plan to kidnap Tetsuo. Kei pleads he can be trusted, and Kaneda makes a point that Tetsuo is his friend. They reluctantly allow him to join their group. Meanwhile, Tetsuo is having more headaches in bed. Takashi, Kyoko and Masaru make an attempt to kill Tetsuo. Tetsuo goes on a violent rampage throughout the hospital, intent on taking revenge. His power is now becoming out of control. Kaneda, Kei and the Colonel are unable to stop Tetsuo's rampage and fail to reason with him. Tetsuo discovers that most of Akira's recoverable scattered body parts lay in cryonic storage underground next to old Tokyo's new Olympic Stadium's construction ground, which is a bizarre coincidence because Japan is holding the Olympics in 2020. Tetsuo manages to transport himself out of the building and focuses all his energy on finding the remains of Akira. Akira has hit 3 different gaming platforms over time. First starting out on Nintendo's Famicom as a text-based adventure, which was favourably reviewed at the time. It was only released in Japan though, but fans have done translations to English so everyone outside of Japan can enjoy it. The one that most people will remember is the Amiga game that turned up on the CD32 and the Amiga 1200. Don't be fooled by the game's nice presentation, because it's one of the worst licensed games out there, riddled with poor controls and game mechanics, and to top it off, it's ridiculously hard. If you can get through the game without cheating, you deserve the Games Master's golden joystick. It starts you off on Kaneda's bike, and the rest of the game basically becomes a platformer. I'm sure most people that played it never got past the first level. Avoid this game like the plague. During the early 90s, a game was announced for the Mega Drive, Mega CD, Super Nintendo, Game Boy and even the Game Gear. It was unfortunately cancelled due to a number of problems with the company producing it, staff leaving to move on to other projects, and the game fell into neglect, so it was scrapped. There was screenshots published in magazines, but that's as far as what people got to see. To celebrate its re-release in 2001, in 2002, a pinball-based game turned up in Japan and released in parts of Europe. It has 4 stages inspired by the movie. It was a very odd choice to go with a pinball game, but the presentation is very slick and worth getting hold of if you are a fan of pinball games. And of course, the movie. The soundtrack, like the recorded dialogue, was produced in the early stages of the production. The composer Yamashiro wrote the score before he even saw the film, so when it came to mixing the music to the visuals, a lot of it had to be edited to fit the final product. The music is certainly very atmospheric and relies heavily on vocal sounds or people breathing heavily, especially during the chase with the clown biker gang. The composer is also a scientist and highly intelligent, and experimented with the hypersonic effect with the original Japanese mix, which supports the idea that although humans cannot consciously hear ultrasound, sounds at frequencies above approximately 20 kHz, the presence or absence of those frequencies has a measurable effect on their psychological reactions. Attempts to independently reproduce these results have so far been unsuccessful, making the composer's theory of the hypersonic effect controversial. I think many have to have good hearing to support this theory. The Blu-ray release is the first to use the highest sampling rate currently possible, with the Japanese Dolby True HD at 192 kHz. You are going to need high-end equipment to get any possible effect of this hypersonic sound. The soundtrack by itself is not really an experience to enjoy on its own in comparison to, say, a John Williams soundtrack, but it is easily available on iTunes and CD and worth hunting down if you are a fan. Because of the enduring popularity of AKIRA, film studios in the United States have all been trying to do a live action version of the anime. Sony had considered it at one point, but balked at the huge estimated budget. But a fan-funded project was produced to create a live action trailer. Shot in Montreal, Quebec in 2012, after over a year and a half in production, it finally turned up in May of this year on YouTube. I've seen it and I'm very impressed with what they did. Capturing the spirit of the anime and the production values was certainly very high. For a fan-produced production, it is of a high quality, so well done to the filmmakers involved. I think, like many of us, AKIRA was our first introduction to Japanese animation on a grand scale, especially with something that was feature-length long. The majority of animated cartoons produced in Japan I'd seen at that point were cheaply made and had weak animation, but once you see AKIRA you are literally blown away by the high level of detail. It outdid everything Disney had produced, which had practically dominated our screens for decades. In the opening bike chase sequence, you'll be amazed how many layers there are to every shot. There's always something moving. If you are a fan of animation or are studying the art of animating, this movie is a good example of learning the techniques used and is a great case study, especially on its visual merits. What Japanese animators have really managed to achieve is that cinematic quality with its execution of its action scenes. Even with dialogue heavy scenes, the setups of the shots look familiar to how someone would shoot in live action. There was always a difference in shooting styles to film to animation in the West, but with anime they really make great strains to make their animated movie feel as real as possible. As a kid, I originally thought the film would focus around Kaneda, because he is the only character to be used in the advertising, but the movie focused around a number of characters that are all key to the film's plot, with Tetsuro, Kei and the Colonel, who are all vital to the film's narrative structure. The movie is generally straightforward at the beginning, but as the plot unfolds and things move along at a quick pace, you may find yourself getting a bit confused or lost. Characters are introduced with little to no backstory, which is the result of cramming the lengthy comics into a film. At the time, what probably took people by surprise was its violence and adult themes. It was a rare thing in the West seeing blood and violence to this extent, and is essentially a cartoon not to be aimed at kids. It felt like a big leap and made it very appealing to many. It helped create a new market. It was animation on an epic scale for a mature audience. My favourite scenes in the movie is the bike chase scene with the clown gang, Tatsuro on his destruction of the city, and the eventual downfall of him as he loses control and becomes this huge mass of fat and muscle and half machine. It comes out of nowhere and is totally unexpected. The level of epicness is off the chart. I saw it shortly after it came out in the UK on VHS. One of my friends just got into Japanese animation, and it was distributed under the name manga. When anyone discussed anime, they just referred to it as manga, so they knew what you were talking about. My first thoughts was that I knew it looked amazing and unlike anything I'd seen before, but the film was totally confusing to me, and I'm sure to many others, and I didn't find it that rewatchable at that point. but it certainly inspired me to get into anime at the time. Me and my friends then ploughed through the other titles released by Manga Entertainment, such as AD Police, Fist of the North Star, Ninja Scroll, Street Fighter 2 and of course Ghost in the Shell. Initially finding Akira confusing, but over time I understood its themes and messages, from its ideas of political satire, religious intentions, its issues with authority and abuse of power all became very clear to me. The ending did certainly baffle and confuse people, and certainly me. Akira shows up causing essentially a big bang, sucking up everything into what appears to be another dimension. Tetsuro and the others with psychic abilities are taken away and I presume are alive in some form or another. During this epic transition, Kaneda experiences flashbacks of Tetsuro's and his childhood and the beginnings of the children who had these special abilities. It does help explain a few plot holes or what appear to be lack of a backstory to some key characters, but I feel this scene and the flashbacks should have occurred a lot earlier in the film, and it does seem out of place at the end. It certainly would have helped people feel more confident with what's going on at an early stage. Akira still stands as one of the most impressive animated movies I have ever seen. It's been out for 26 years and nothing really since has impressed me that much. It has inspired many filmmakers, video game designers and storytellers. The Matrix is certainly a movie heavily inspired by Akira and also the recent movie Chronicle. Every time I revisit it I notice new things, and it is a movie that gets better with repeated viewing. I don't think the movie is for everyone though. Its ideas and philosophies may be a bit heavy-handed for some, and there are many other titles that may pique your interest in anime, but none really come close to the magnificent and epic grandness of Akira. I hope you enjoyed the video. Be sure to subscribe to see more retrospectives and commentaries. Also click on the bell to be notified of the latest reviews. If you want access to exclusive videos and to watch my content a few days before it's on YouTube, you can head on over to my Patreon. Thank you very much.